Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard here, welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at a 50mm f1.4 lens from AstrHori. AstrHori is a relatively new company, so you may not heard of their name before. This 50mm f1.4 is quite a special lens because it is a tilt lens. It can be used to create photos with really unique look, and the price is also very affordable for a tilt lens. I had lots of fun shooting with it and shot some pretty cool photos, but I definitely had a few issues with it as well, and I will talk about them in this review. And before we start, just the usual disclaimer. This sample was sent to me by AstrHori, but as usual, this is a completely independent review, so you will hear me talk about the things I like and don't like about this lens. Before we talk about the build quality and image quality, I want to quickly talk about what is a tilt lens first. If you already know what a tilt lens is, you can just jump to the next session using the chapter index of this video. With a normal lens, let's say if you are in front of a brick wall and you point your camera parallel to the brick wall and you focus at the center of the brick wall, then in your photo, the whole wall should be in theory or in focus and very sharp even if you are shooting at a large aperture. It is because the plane of focus is parallel to your camera's sensor. Now, if you have a tilt lens, if you tilt the lens a little bit and shoot the same photo again, you will find there's only one section of the wall that is in focus because the plane of focus is no longer parallel to the wall. If you want to shoot a brick wall that is in an angle, you could tilt the lens a bit to align the plane of focus with the wall, and you can get the whole wall in focus even if you are shooting with a large aperture. But you can also do the opposite thing, that is intentionally tilt the lens in the opposite direction, and that means you can make the focus area or the depth of field to appear a lot more narrower than it otherwise would be. A lot of photographers and videographers would use this trick to create photos or videos that look like a toy scene because our brain would associate that unusual shallow depth of field look with photos of small scale objects like toys. You can also create some dreamy portrait photo using a tilt lens, as the tilt lens can render the scene in very unusual way and give the photo a very unique look. I remember when I first started doing wedding photography, I bought a Nikon 45mm tilt shift lens just to achieve those dreamy look for some portrait photos. I didn't really need the shift effect, well, not for wedding photography anyway, and I love the photos that I got from that tilt shift lens. But that Nikon tilt shift lens is a manual focus lens that I only use it for a few photos at each wedding, and that lens is really expensive as well. I think it is around $2,000 US or over 3,000 New Zealand dollars here. So I wouldn't really buy that if I wasn't using that to shoot some weddings. So while this AstrHori lens is not exactly the Nikon tilt shift lens, but it can allow you to achieve the tilt effect, and the price of this lens is really quite affordable at just $259 US. It is much cheaper than my Nikon lens for sure, especially if you just want to achieve the tilt effect. And in some way, it is even better than my Nikon lens because it allows me to tilt it in any angle easily, while the Nikon I can only tilt it along one axis. But a 3D tiltable design does come with some drawbacks, which I will talk about next. Just like most other manual focus lenses from China, this AstrHori 50mm f1.4 lens also has a full metal construction. The body of the lens is made of metal, it has a metal lens mount, and even the front lens cover is made of metal. So the lens feels pretty solid. It is a completely mechanical lens with no electronic contacts and there's no autofocus. It is a full frame lens and it is available for the Sony E mount, Leica L mount, Canon RF and also Nikon Z mount. Of course, you can use it on the APS-C camera as well, and it is also available for the Fuji X mount. There are 3 rings on the lens. The The first one is the aperture ring at the front, which is a decrypted aperture ring. Then you have the focus ring behind it. The focus flow is about 110 degrees. Both the aperture and the focus ring are quite smooth, but for some reason, the hard stop on the focus ring is not completely hard stop. What I mean is, if I rotate the aperture ring, then there's a very nice hard stop when it reaches the end. But with the focus ring, it feels like there is a rubber or plastic spacer or something like that at the end. So you get a slightly rubbery feeling when the focus ring reaches the end. It doesn't feel quite as nice as the aperture ring. The last ring, I call it the tilt ring. It is for you to unlock the rotatable joint of the lens. Then you can tilt the lens in any direction you want. And after you set it to the tilt angle you want, then you can rotate the tilt ring back and lock that joint. It seems pretty easy and straightforward, but I do find a few issues when using it in real life. Firstly, there is a dotted line printed on the lens to help you align the lens back to the non-shift position, but that's pretty much the only thing that helps you to realign the lens. In practice, it is really hard to make the lens perfectly aligned with the sensor if you want to have absolutely no tilt. Secondly, when you loosen up the tilt ring, the whole lens can actually rotate as well. So quite often I end up having all the focus scale, the aperture scale rotated to the bottom side of the lens. So once I lock the tilt ring, I can't really see what aperture I'm using or the focus distance I set to, and I end up have to loosen up the tilt ring and then rotate the lens body back so everything is at the top side so I can see them clearly again. And when you try to lock the tilt ring, you need to make sure you lock it quite tight, or otherwise you may accidentally move or rotate the lens body when you are adjusting the focus or aperture. So these are some of the usability issues that I have because of the lens freely tiltable design. So are these huge problems? To be honest, no, especially if you are being careful and adjust everything slowly. But I do bump into these issues quite regularly when I want to take a photo very quickly and need to adjust the tilt angle, and I end up have to unlock the tilt ring and readjust and lock the tilt ring again, which means this is not really a lens that is suitable for taking photo very quickly. The minimum focus distance of this lens is approximately 40 cm, which is not bad for a 50mm lens. This is a photo I shot at the minimum focus distance. The size of my Leica minifigure looks not bad at all. The photo was shot at f1.4 and the sharpness is also quite acceptable. Now let's have a look at the image sharpness, and let's start with the center sharpness first. At f1.4, the center is slightly soft. I can see a bit of glow effect, and the contrast is a bit low, and there is also a tiny bit of chromatic aberration. Stop down to f2, it becomes quite a bit better, but you do have to stop down to f4 to get great center sharpness. The center sharpness will keep improve a little bit if you continue to stop down the lens more until you reach f11, then diffraction starting to reduce the center sharpness. We'll look at the corner now. Usually these days, my corner sharpness test photos were shot with the focus on the center of the photo. The reason is that it will also show if the lens has any noticeable field curvature issue. However, because it is a tilt lens, and as I've said before, it is quite hard to get this lens to perfectly align with no tilt at all. So these corner sharpness test photos were shot with the focus at the corner of the photo. At f1.4, the corner is quite soft with low contrast and a bit of chromatic aberration. Stopping down the lens will gradually improve the corner sharpness. At f4, the corner is acceptable, but I need to stop down the lens to around f5.6 to get really good corner sharpness. In practice, it will be even harder to get good corner sharpness as it is not exactly easy to get the lens to perfectly align with the camera sensor, and any misalignment would very likely reduce the corner sharpness. If you don't tilt the lens, the bokeh balls are quite round even when you stop down the lens a bit. There is a bit of cat's eye effect near the corner, but this is a tilt lens, so the whole point of this lens is to tilt the lens and get some special results. And when you tilt the lens, the bokeh balls from this lens does look very different compared to the normal lenses. Here are a few photos that I shot from the exact same spot or at f1.4, but I tilt the lens in different angle. The bokeh looks very different in each photo. The bokeh balls could get squashed in different way, and the transition at the edge of the bokeh balls also would look very different. Some have a very smooth transition, and some have a very noticeable halo ring at the edge of the bokeh balls, almost like from a mirror lens. To be honest, even after shooting this lens for a few weeks, I still haven't exactly figured out how to make the bokeh to render in a certain way with this lens yet. But I can tell you it is really quite fun experimenting what you can do with this lens, especially when you are shooting in a place with a lot of lights in the background. I probably will try it out when I shoot my next wedding that has some fairy lights in the background, as I think it would give me some really nice and special effect. Let's have a look at the vignetting test photos. At f1.4, there is a bit of vignetting, but I don't think it is serious, and when you stop down the lens to f2.8, then vignetting is almost not noticeable. So if you are shooting normally with the lens untilted, vignetting is very well controlled. However, you have to be careful if you want to tilt the lens. When you tilt the lens to the maximum angle, the edge of the photo would become black, so it's not just vignetting, it's actually part of the photo would turn completely black. But I was using it on a full frame camera, so if you use it on an APS-C camera, then you should be fine even if you fully tilt the lens. As a cheap, fast tilt lens from a relatively new company, I was expecting the lens would have quite a bit of chromatic aberration. And yes, it does. The lens does show some noticeable chromatic aberration. Have a look at this test photo. If we zoom in, the color fringing is quite noticeable. And when I look at my real-world photos, I also see color fringing quite easily in a lot of my photos, especially near the high contrast area. In terms of distortion, when the lens is not tilted, there is a bit of barrel distortion, as you can see in this brick wall photo. While it is not terrible, it is definitely more than what I expect from a normal 50mm lens. Lens flare control is really average with this 50mm tilt lens. I would get lens flare quite easily when shooting into a light source. The lens flare actually looks quite nice to me, so I don't really mind because it does add a bit of character to the photos. But one thing I don't really like that much is the contrast would also drop quite a bit when you are shooting into the sun or other bright light source. And since the lens doesn't come with any lens hood, so when I'm shooting on a bright sunny day, a lot of my photos would have quite low contrast. With a tilt lens like this AstrHori 50mm lens, I would usually say you should be shooting at maximum aperture or around that all the time, because most of us would get a lens like this to get that dreamy shadow depth of field look, rather than the maximum depth of field by aligning the focal plane with your scene. But there is actually a very good reason why you would want to stop down this lens, and it is to get the beautiful sunstars. From around f5.6, you can start to get sunstars from this 50mm lens, and as you stop down the lens, sunstars would become sharper. At f16, I can get some really beautiful 12-point sunstars. I was not expecting that, but yes, I'm certainly not complaining. Most of the lenses I have reviewed on this channel are designed with the main objective is to achieve the best possible image quality. Now, of course, there would be compromises, for example, because of the price or the size of the lens, which means quite often the manufacturer have to sacrifice a bit of image quality in some area, but still the main purpose is to deliver the best possible image quality. But the lens that we are looking at today is quite different, very different I would say. For sure, image quality is still something that is kind of important for any kind of lens, or I wouldn't have done all those image quality tests in this review. But the main focus of this AstrHori 50mm f1.4 is really about creating a lens that delivers images that a normal lens can't do, something that allow you to have more creativity and have fun. Image quality is not really the most important thing. So if you want to have a nice 50mm lens with great image quality, this AstrHori lens is probably one of the worst lenses that you can buy. But what it offers instead is a very affordable way to do tilt photography. You can use it to turn a normal scene to look like a toy scene. You can create some dreamy portrait photo. You can create some crazy bokeh effect that normal lens can't do. It is not an easy lens to use though. Actually, it was a bit frustrating, especially when I want to take some photos very quickly for the reason I already mentioned earlier in this review. But if you are okay to slow down a bit, you take your time and experiment with the tilt effect and slowly change the settings, then this lens could be one of the most fun lenses that is also not very expensive at all.